Hello, and welcome to the ALN 2020 Asset Leadership Forum, Restructuring America. I'm Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited to be starting off today's event, the ALN Thursday at 4 Special Federal Asset Managers Session. One note before we begin, if you're watching the event and want to comment or ask a question, please feel free to write your comments and questions in the chat or use the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar, because we'd love to hear your feedback, and that's a good way to do it. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Bob Leach, ALN Senior Fellow and Senior Consultant at Wolpert.
Howdy, good afternoon, everybody. This is Bob Leach. For those of you who don't know me, I'll give you a quick recap. I started out my career when I was about 6 years old on working on boats, and which turns out, that was a whole career for me. Turns out that was actually asset management. I just didn't know it at the time because as you go over the horizon, you have to take care of everything. And so you come face to face with the realities of your actions and strategic objectives colliding, sometimes in not the best ways. So that was all really good training. I ended up at the Corps of Engineers driving one of their boats, ended up at headquarters running their fleet of boats. They have about 3,000 vessels that they manage. And one thing led to another. And I ended up running their asset management program as that got off the ground. So I did that, I was involved in that for about 15 years and spent the last 6 years of my career at the Corps actually running that program. So I got very, very familiar with it. This was back in the days of PAS 55 when that was first stood up, and then ISO 55000 came along. And the Corps saw, at least the civil works side of it, saw a lot of advantage in aligning with those principles and bringing a lot of clarity to the organization and the actual decisions being made, the investments being made, and how to actually adjudicate across all those things in a more reasonable fashion. Because the whole point of the Corps of Engineers, Public Works, Civil Works is to deliver benefits to the nation. And the more clarity we had to do that, the better those benefits could be delivered and the more benefits you could deliver for essentially the same amount of money. So that equation was what we were in pursuit of, and I'm happy to say that's continuing now that I've left, and some might say got out of the way, but it's working. So what we have here today is a panel of folks. We've got Peter Dodgen from the Corps of Engineers, who I had worked with for a number of years and then ended up getting the position I vacated. We have Chris Vick from the Bureau of Reclamation, who runs their asset management division. And we have Keith Hannigan from the Department of State, and I'm going to try and get this right, Keith. I think you're Deputy Assistant Secretary for Operations. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to these guys, let them introduce themselves to you a little more. I'm going to actually start off with the thought of how they got interested or how their agencies got interested in asset management and in particularly ISO 55000, if that's applicable. And where they are now. They've all been on a journey here, I would say. They're engaged in the asset management journey, neck deep, some might say, largely because in my perspective, and feel free to correct me as you get into this, I believe they recognized a need, just like the Corps did, to connect the dots in the organization, really to provide additional benefits. And really, it's not any simpler than that. I think the bottom line, that's what it's all about. In a lot of cases, being federal agencies, they've been influenced by things like public law, like GIPRA, for instance. OMB has a big say in how these things progress. Congress, of course, in funding, appropriations, and authorizations, and GAO, too. But I would venture to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, that a lot of this was internally driven. In other words, Congress didn't come and say, you need to go do asset management. I believe all the agencies sort of internally recognize this. So with that, I will turn it over to, well, let's start with Chris.
All right, well, thank you, Bob. As Bob mentioned, my name is Chris Vick, and I have the pleasure of managing the Bureau of Reclamation's asset management program. Just two topics I'm going to cover today. Just an overview of the Bureau of Reclamation. A lot of people get us confused, don't know who we are. So just a quick overview of the organization, and then provide just an update on our asset management program since last year. So who we are, Reclamation, we have our mission to manage, develop, and protect water-related resources in an environmentally, economically sound manner in the interest of the American public. Sounds like asset management, doesn't it? We are the nation's largest wholesale water supplier. We operate 338 reservoirs with a total storage capacity of over 140 million acre feet. To put that into context, we store enough water in our reservoirs to supply about 140 million families for an entire year. We also provide 1 out of 5 Western farmers with irrigation water. We irrigate about 10 million acres of farmland that produces about 60% of the nation's vegetables and about a quarter of its fresh fruits and nut crops. We're also the second largest producer of hydropower in the United States. We operate 53 hydroelectric power plants, and we produce about 40 billion kilowatt hours every year, or over the last about 10 years. It's important to note we are second to the Army Corps of Engineers. They are the #1 hydropower producer in the country, but we do have the largest generating units in the world at our Grand Coulee Dam. We have 3 units that operate 810 megawatts apiece, and those are still the largest generators in the world. We also have a big recreation component. We manage about 250 recreation sites, and we get about 100 million visitors annually, mostly recreating on our reservoirs. And we contribute about $64 billion a year in economic output, and support about 500,000 jobs. And we own a lot of assets. Our current replacement value is over $110 billion. We have about 500 dams in our fleet. Like I mentioned, 338 reservoirs. Again, we're the second largest producer of hydropower with 76 hydropower plants. We have a lot of roads. We have about 2,600 miles of roads. We have about 300 public bridges and about 5,000 total bridges in our inventory. And then we also have quite a few miles of trails, over 1,500 miles of trails. So that's the Bureau of Reclamation. We're well known for the Grand Coulee Dam, the Hoover Dam, which hopefully you can see behind me in the video. In our asset management division, it's part of our Reclamation's Dam Safety and Infrastructure Directorate. And the directorate falls under the Chief Engineers Organization. We have 18 employees in total, and that's split between 3 different branches. We have the Operations and Maintenance branch, which sets standards and guidelines and provides training to create consistency across the agency on how we do operation and maintenance. Then we have our Land Resources branch. So this is everything related to the lands that we own. We own about 7 million acres of land, and they look at land management as well as recreation. And the third branch is what we call our Infrastructure Investment and Management branch. And that's really where we do more of the nuts and bolts of asset management. So to provide some updates of where we are from last year, we're really proud and pleased that we released our first strategic asset management plan this year. It does align with the ISO 55000. And with the pandemic, we have seen some great efficiencies from releasing that strategic asset management plan. Our next iteration will be more heavily focused on strategy. We hope to have that out next year. And you can look at our strategic asset management plans available to the public on our website, which is www.usbr.gov. We also continue to build our asset inventory. That's something we've really been trying to do. What do we own and where is it located? And create consistency across the entire agency. This year we mined over 80 different data sets. All these data sets had disparate data, and we're developing an authoritative source for our inventory. We're doing that through GIS layers, and we're developing between 10 and 12 different GIS layers that will show all of our assets across the agency. Right now, we've pretty much completed the draft of that inventory effort, and the next step is setting those layers out to the field for verification and validation. We've built a smart editor tool that's going to allow the field staff to easily manipulate the data to ensure that we have the most accurate asset data. We really feel that developing a solid asset inventory is the true foundation to asset management moving into the future. We really feel like it's going to set us up for success over the next decade or two. We hope to have that project complete within the next 2 years, if not earlier. And again, I can't say it enough. Just having an accurate asset inventory is the foundation for asset management and setting up reclamation for future positive progress. Another big development this year is we had a law that was signed in March of 2019 called the Reclamation Transparency Act. And what that requires is a list of repair needs, a cost estimate for each of those repair needs, and a relative level of importance. And we have to submit that back to Congress every 2 years starting in March of 21. So we have a draft report that's already been developed. We're currently vetting that, and it should be submitted to Congress in the next couple of months. The relative level of importance that Congress is asking for, we've developed 5 different buckets. We call those A through E projects, and those are based upon risk and benefit. And we're calculating risk as the product of likelihood and consequence, and then benefit is calculated by the return on investment and enhancement of reclamation's mission. And again, this is giving us the relative level of importance of each of these projects that we're submitting to Congress. And then also, it's important to note that that report will be publicly available, so everybody on the call today can access the report if you'd like to look at it. Another big area of focus this year was what we call our Major Rehabilitation Replacement, or MR&R. As part of the Transparency Act, we're collecting our MR&R needs across the agency. MR&R includes deferred maintenance, so that's maintenance that we had planned. For some reason or another, it was delayed to a future period of time. All of our safety of dams projects, we have quite a few safety of dams projects. Those are all part of our MR&R. And then anything that's considered extraordinary maintenance. These are the big projects typically over $100,000. Those all fall into the bucket of MR&R. This year we developed a new SharePoint application that's made it easier on the field to report the information to us. We've also developed an IT solution to allow everyone from the field, all the way from the field to headquarters, to really slice and dice the data any way they would like to. We're getting a lot of really good buy-in from the field, which is always positive and it's great. As many of you know, it's not really easy to do. We just finished our FY20 analysis last week, and our projected 5-year need is $4 billion, and our need over the next 30 years is $12 billion. We feel pretty confident in that $4 billion number over the next 5 years. That 30-year figure of $12 billion is likely pretty low. But we have more, regardless, we have more money, more needs than we have money, and we really feel like asset management is going to help us prioritize those investments. We're also continuing to participate on the Federal Asset Management Working Group, and that work group is composed of Reclamation, Peter with the Army Corps of Engineers, WAPA, the Western Area Power Administration, and the Bonneville Power Administration. For each meeting, we select a theme and we do a deep dive into that area. In the past, we've discussed asset management plans, strategic asset management plans, computerized maintenance management systems, maintenance philosophies, communications surrounding asset management, and other topics just focused specifically on asset management. We've seen a lot of success from the working group, and we really feel like it's pushed reclamation as an agency. And I think the other federal agencies that are part of that working group would attest to that. We're also looking at tools and technology. Back to data, it's just so important to get good and high quality data. We're really putting emphasis on good data collection. We're looking at our Maximo system. So we use Maximo as our computerized maintenance management system, and we call our version of Maximo, our customized version of Maximo, Karma. When we originally procured Maximo, we allowed the field to set it up in any way they wanted to, and that's really proven to be quite an issue for us. We now have a few dozen different asset hierarchies and just a lack of consistency, specifically with granularity of the assets across the agency. We recently developed a solicitation for a Karma strategic plan. What this is going to do is going to document the current state of the application And then we're asking a contractor to benchmark reclamation across industry as well as other government agencies. The contractor will be reaching out to our field staff, our regional staff, and staff at headquarters, giving us that full line of sight for their vision of where they want that system to go. And once we have that vision established, we're asking the contractor to develop a gap analysis and provide a few different options to set up reclamation for success into the future. We plan on selecting an alternative, and then this will become what we call our strategic plan for Karma, for updating Karma. We're also using IT solutions such as Tableau. We're finding a lot of success from Tableau as well as MS Power Apps, Microsoft Power Apps. Just for visual, we're getting a lot of this great data in, and just displaying it to leadership is just so important. These different data visualization tools have really helped us kind of start to crack that nut on the importance of good data, and when we collect good data, how we can give that data back to the field for them to utilize. And then finally, we're looking at how to better utilize mobile solutions. We're still doing, through our operation and maintenance programs, we're still doing a lot of pen and paper inspections. We really want to get away from that. We want to start using mobile solutions. We're seeing we could see a lot of efficiencies. Right now, we're sending inspectors out to the field. They spend a day out in the field and then anywhere between a day or two back in the office, hand typing the reports and entering them into a system. With a mobile solution, we know we're going to gain efficiencies by allowing those field staff to go out into the field, collect all the data that they need. The data would be in the right fields because they're following a mobile solution. And then when they return back to the office at the end of the day, all that data is being uploaded back into the system. So they do not need to spend another day or two in the office hand typing the reports. And those are the major updates I had this year. Bob, I'll turn it back to you.
That is fantastic, Chris. Sounds like you guys have been really, really busy and made great strides. So I appreciate that. We got a couple of questions. One of them I'm going to wait on because I think it applies to all three agencies. So I'll ask it at the end about cybersecurity. There is one question about the working group that can who can join and how, if possible.
Well, it's a secret group. No, I'm just kidding. No, we're always looking for additional membership. So please, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Peter. We're both on the working group team. And we have a meeting coming up here, I believe, in November. And if you're interested, I believe my contact information is available. Just reach out to me and let's chat.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's fantastic. Really, you guys have been, particularly I like the, I didn't know about the Transparency Act. And so I'm very interested myself in checking that out. You guys have to report every 2 years. It sounds like I was wrong in the beginning when I said this was all internally driven. Now you got an external driver. So with that, why don't we tee up Peter and the Corps of Engineers?
Okay, Bob, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, you know, it's tough to follow Chris Vick. Chris, you really do set a high mark for not only for the polish of your presentation, but the Bureau is carrying out their modernization and asset management in a very professional way. It's nice. So I think a lot of folks maybe have an idea. The Corps of Engineers, it's an Army unit. It's the reservoir near the house. And Bob, you know, Bob, I'm actually Bob Leach now. I've found since I've taken over this position that I'm
so sorry, really.
I often introduce myself as Bob Leach, which is great, you know, because I get immediate credibility. But we're the Corps of Engineers on the civil works side. So we're not a military appropriated agency. We're entirely energy and water. I think the same appropriation as Chris, as the Bureau of Rec. And we're about 23,000 employees nationwide, all civilian. There's a couple hundred Army officers also mixed in there in command elements, but it's a civilian organization, about 23,000 employees. We manage 600 plus dams around the country. So pretty big footprint on the physical infrastructure side. Most of the, we also do environmental stewardship work, environmental restoration works. We have some facilities that are dedicated to that. We, as Chris mentioned, a good footprint in hydropower and also water supply. Our dams are dedicated to navigation, to support inland navigation on the rivers, to maintain pool for transit, not for water supply, which is what Chris does, and then also for flood risk reduction or flood risk management at reservoirs in primarily headwater regions. What a lot of people don't necessarily recognize, and I came up through the Corps. I was in the planning element with the Corps for a number of years. Our navigation business is highly focused on the coastal area. We actually maintain about 13,000 miles of coastal channels. It's a huge part of the budget. It's about half of our annual budget. So, but it's sort of a silent effort out there. When the channels are open, everything's good, and we do a pretty good job of keeping those channels open. We also manage about a little over 1,000 harbors of various types around the country. So kind of give you an idea what the assets look like. It's a tricky business, the asset management program. So I'm just going to quickly kind of talk about some of the big things that are active in the program today. We've had throughout the Corps, the agency, we've had a number of condition assessment programs sort of grow up over the years. We've got coastal condition assessment programs. We've got electrical mechanical condition assessment programs. We've got dam structure assessment programs, and we've developed about a dozen pretty highline condition assessment programs and processes around the agency that deal with these various business lines, as I mentioned, coastal navigation and flood risk management and inland navigation. Hydropower has their own condition assessment program. So right now, as an agency, we're trying to get these things sort of corralled. They sort of grew up organically, as Bob mentioned. People recognize there's a need to perform these condition assessments, and they've developed with a pretty consistent sort of approach, but they're not entirely consistent. So we're currently developing an about the condition assessment process, how we turn that condition assessment into probability of failure. That's the ultimate, that's the end game that you would have in a condition assessment program, to ultimately be able to use that in a risk assessment of some kind as probability of failure. But we've got a number of different approaches to that, and we'd like to get some consistencies on that. So that's a big piece, sort of the nuts and bolts of what we're working on, in the summer of 2020. Another big thing, again, trying to keep up with Chris and the Bureau of Rec. We've started in a very concerted way to develop a strategic asset management plan for the agency. We need it. We have a great diversity of assets. We're very disintegrated in terms of our organization. We have districts all across the country, and so our management practices are pretty diverse. So we need some strategic alignment. So currently we have a number of cross-functional PDTs from our engineering and construction element, from our planning element, from our operations and maintenance, from our programs and financial management organizations. And we're meeting right now. Over the next 3 months, we're having these teams put together a game plan, identifying the ideal future case that we need to have. And a lot of it is working out cross-functional, dealing with this tyranny of small decisions, all these specialized elements, making these small decisions, and they accumulate through the organization, and we don't get get that enterprise value that we really ought to have. In fact, we don't even have a good view of what that enterprise value is. And so this strategic asset management plan will put us on the road to developing that. And this is all, thankfully, we have an enterprise policy. Our director of civil works, who's the senior civilian in our agency, he's expressed his desire for asset management. He's very adamant about it. He had he's identified 6 policy objectives for us. One of them, cross-functional integration. He wants us to achieve very specific goals in the program, and one of them is to align with the ISO 55000. So we're busy with that right now. I would say early spring we'll have a draft, and that draft will start animating follow-on work. The work that we're doing right now is really to identify the needs, and then we're going to follow on for 2 or 3 years, probably stitching some of these organizations together, stitching decision-making processes together so that we can get better enterprise value. You know, I tell people in a complex organization like the Corps or the Bureau, specialization is the only way to get the job done, because it's complicated. What we're doing is complex. So you have to have specialization. We haven't done it. We haven't been good at policing that need to stitch things back together so that we can achieve a common value. So I'll talk real quickly. We also have a Maximo based maintenance management software that we use. We call ours FEM. I just admire the Bureau. Karma is definitely the right terminology for a maintenance management system like Maximo. We struggle. We're continuing to struggle with hierarchy issues, data organization issues. And I've decided recently to table some of those issues for now while we get our enterprise asset registry kind of squared away. And then we're going to come back and resolve the Maximo organization problem. And you know, something for those of you who work inside Maximo, in the back of my mind, I'm hopeful that when we come back with that enterprise asset registry, we won't have to start the process over. We'll be able to plug in through the tremendous capability that Maximo has. We'll be able to use attribution classification or some kind of we'll be able to leverage some of those capabilities to continue the process with Maximo rather than doing a reset. I'm trying to avoid a reset, but we have a similar hierarchy and data organization problem. I think other agencies have where some of this software sort of was born without a lot of guidance or even really a lot of in-house expertise to know even how to deploy it. So it just sort of mentioning was COVID. I think the Corps of Engineers is certainly not the poster child for asset management, although some people think we are. We do pretty well, and when COVID came about, it introduced an interesting problem for our leaders. We suddenly had a very acute concern, which was we deliver value through our assets, through our infrastructure, and our infrastructure primarily is able to deliver value through the actions of humans working at those sites. Hydropower operators operating hydropower plants, maintenance people keeping facilities operating, flood risk management projects with dam tenders operating the flood risk project during the flood. And COVID was a clear and present danger to the humans and to the availability of personnel, okay? And so very early on in the COVID crisis, the leaders turned to the chief of operations and said, what's our status? I want to have a picture. I want to have an idea of where our mission essential projects are, because COVID is spreading. It's sort of spreading from the East Coast and from the Northwest. Or in the early days, that seemed to be how it was going to propagate. I know it's there, but it's going to be everywhere. And I want to have a picture. I want to know where the projects are. I want to know where the mission essential projects are. And then I want to start looking at, are we ready? What kind of risks are we facing? What's our cyber footprint look like? What operational factors are we concerned about? Where can we share personnel? How can we deal with a declining personnel base in the event of the COVID wave sweeping across? And everyone can remember those early projections of COVID were very dire. I spent weeks just bathing in those projections, and there were pretty serious concerns that around the first part of April, the whole entire mid part of the country was going to be awash in COVID, and we were not going to have personnel necessarily available to operate our projects. So what's that mean to asset management? Well, the chief of operations turned to me and in asset management and said, okay, I need a picture of our mission essential functions projects. And the Department of Homeland Security had articulated to the agencies what the administration was concerned about in terms of mission essential functions. And ours was navigation and flood risk management, primarily hydropower. Those were the primary ones. So, 10 years ago, that would have been a real challenge. Just to come up with a list in the Corps of Engineers. We've got 600 dams, 600 some change dams. Which ones serve what business line? 10 years ago, that would have been really difficult. Well, thankfully, thanks to Bob and the efforts of folks before me, that wasn't that hard to do. In fact, what we found when the commander started asking the questions of the assets, what's the personnel footprint, what's the capability of, what's the operational risks, what sort of benefit streams, where do these things rank in terms of their delivery? If we have to make choices, which ones will we step away from first and redirect personnel? But it was all there. The data was there in the Corps of Engineers. It wasn't convenient in any way. It was not well organized. We talk about the FEM data organization issue, and this data was not well organized. It was not easy to analyze, but it was there. And so that was really heartening for the agency to know that, hey, we are collecting this. We've started thinking about this in a deliberate way and collecting it. So today, fiscal year 21, one of our major, it's a small project in the overall asset management program, but one of our, a project that's got my attention because this whole COVID problem occupied weeks of my life. We call it the Mission Essential Functions Project. And what we're doing is we're looking at all this enterprise data that speaks to our project readiness and our project health condition, and can inform status and the nexus with mission. All this data, and we're analyzing it. And we're trying to figure out. We have some folks from our CIO, our information office, help and pick and choose and correct the naming disconnections and various odd things that exist in the data. How do we correct that? What's the right way to go about that? And we're gonna chew on that for probably 6 months, and then we're gonna start implementing some overarching data architecture to our asset data so that we can do better in the future. And I offer that because if you didn't have that experience with COVID and you're developing an asset management program and you want to think about that data architecture just as early as you can. Because obviously this would have never happened in the Corps. We're not structured this way, but had we been deliberate about developing the asset information in a more organized way, we wouldn't be having to stitch these data sets together in 2020. They'd naturally be coherent. So I wanted to offer that as a thought for the participants. That's about what I've got, Bob. I'd be happy to answer questions later if they come up.
Yeah, we've got a couple that'll come up later, but there's one immediate one for you. which is the strategic asset management plan you refer to, is that an update of a previous plan or is that a new plan?
Well, it's a new plan. We've never, the Corps of Engineers has had various plans, program management plans, and some draft strategies for asset management. And Bob, you were involved in those. This is the first, I'll say it's the first because it's the first one that's really conformant with the 55,000. So it's the only one that, you know, from the standpoint of some sort of independent standard outside the Corps that people would recognize as a strategy. And it's the only, it'll be the first one that we'll put in front of our senior civilian leaders and get them to endorse. So it's new.
That's great. I wasn't aware of all the efforts made that COVID sparked. So it's good to hear. I'm sure it was messy, but it's good to hear that you were able to make sense of it in an easier fashion than maybe would have been the case previously.
Well, it was there. Yeah, it helps. The first thing is that it be there, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Mm-hmm.
So Keith, now we'll roll over to you.
All right, great. Good afternoon, Bob. Thanks, and thanks for everyone for the invitation. Again, a tough order to follow both Chris and Peter. I will do my best. So I'm calling in today from Harry S. Truman Building, the State Department headquarters here in Washington, D.C. A little bit on my background. I started in the private sector with Turner Construction in Boston, and went into the Peace Corps and served as the chief engineer for the Honair Town Council in Solomon Islands, and then ended up spending about another 5-6 years working for an Australian engineering company, working throughout the South Pacific. So my interest in and love of asset management really started there. If you ever worked in a harsh environment like that with the heat and the humidity and the salt, then you come to appreciate taking care of things and what you need to do and be mindful of life cycles, which are extremely short there. Moved on from that and spent most of my career overseas managing facilities, about a dozen locations around the world. I've probably been to 50 or 60 other embassies as well, and managed anything from, for other small locations in Nicaragua to our largest embassies in Afghanistan and Iraq. So really interesting experience doing that. And again, depending on the location, it became super important to take care of our assets. And in those situations, I was really on the end of the food chain, right? I wasn't involved in the design, or the construction of them, but I received these facilities, and I can't say that they're always in ideal condition for longevity and for what we're doing. So you come to appreciate, hey, this is something that really should be a team effort. Everybody should be in the tent right from the beginning. So that kind of bred a lot of things in me. I came back to DC and ran the facility management office for overseas buildings operations, 280 posts around the world, and really started pushing in on moving towards a real, life cycle cost management, total cost of ownership, looking at some ISO at that point, and really trying to move the organization in that direction in that holistic, comprehensive way. And now I've moved over to A Bureau, the Administration Bureau here, which manages the department's domestic portfolio, which is in about 150 locations. 80% of those are in the National Capital Region, about 10 million square feet. And they, most of them consist of GSA full service leases and about 17 or 18 DOS owned or delegated properties in their offices and warehouses, data centers, training facilities, diplomatic security field offices, consular passport agencies, and the like. So really interesting, I think, having the experience in both domestically and overseas and in a whole bunch of different working environments has been really instructive as to why I value asset management so much and really want to see it instituted in a holistic way for the Department of State. So, for us, I think like anyone, I'll read out some of what our challenges are. They shouldn't be much different from anybody else's. But as Bob well knows, the number one thing on my hit list is silos. I cannot stand stovepiping. I think it's our number one threat, really to any organization. It differs a little bit from what Peter was saying, about specialists. Now talking about that, it's groups that kind of keep their data to themselves and aren't willing to share. And you know, that's the difficulty, right? If we're working with blinders on and we're not looking at the full picture, then we're missing a good show. And that's been, I think, one of the greatest frustrations for me in my career is just not enough of us really looking at that and saying that we can be so much bigger, so much better, so much farther along if we work together, right? And anything information I have, I'm very willing, you know, to share with anyone else. So that's one thing. I mean, not considering the tail. So we do things up front, and we're not really considering what are going to be the long-term repercussions or ramifications of those decisions we make, you know, early on in that. So that's a problem. Lack of data, and we've talked about that before, and not having the data, not using performance metrics or analytics to do our job. Become out of touch with industry, right? And probably like many of you out here, I've heard it that, you know, we're special, we're different, you know, we can't do it like anybody else. There's no way. You know, that's not true. You know, that's not true from any place I've ever worked, but it is a great excuse that people continue to use. And human capital side of it, right? This is one that is tough for all of us. Is we need to make sure that we're doing succession planning. We need to make sure that we continually train, have people with the right skills and certifications, so that we can continue to do it and change as as technology changes, as our world changes. We can do it. Issues with either flat or reduced budgets, and for us domestically, we deal with a single-year appropriation, which I don't really know how you do real property asset management with single-year appropriations. I mean, you better have all your information really well packed, really well together, and can forecast, well out to do something like that. And I can't say that we're there yet. So, yeah, I think a lot of that results in kind of a reactive, on your heels approach, which is not effective and not cost efficient, and it really puts a high level of stress on everybody, right? If you're coming in and you're not quite sure what you're doing, and you're always reacting to, waiting for that next shoe to drop, that's a tough way to manage facilities. So sometimes it can feel like you're in a sinking ship and you got a Dixie cup. You got a small little Dixie cup that you're trying to bail with. So a lot of frustration in those ends. So those are some of the things, that we see and that we're dealing with it. So what are we trying to do? We've created a real property asset management program, an RPAM program initiative, and it's in accordance with federal mandates and incorporating best industry practices, and so it really constitutes a clear vision and true cradle to grave real property stewardship in a holistic, comprehensive, collaborative, communicative, transparent, and accountable manner. So that's not really something that fits on a bumper sticker really well. But every single one of those words is important, right? When you're trying to move in this direction, everything matters in that one. And so that's what we are trying to do. So moving from that siloed, stovepipe, personality-driven, ad hoc approach to a more standardized, programmatic, data-driven business model is where we're going. So, it's been great. OMB, Amelia was on earlier, and I like when we kind of get pushed into doing it. I think sometimes if we were left to our own devices, we're not going to do this. So it's not bad to get a shove. So I was really excited to see OMB's M23 and M2010 directives going out on real property capital planning, kind of forces in the right direction. And for me, as Bob well knows as well, I walk around with a box of publications that go back, and starting with Executive Order 13327. I mean, I really think the end of the 1990s and the early 2000s was the heyday of asset management. So, I've got my national academies and, the publications from Predicting Outcomes of Investments in M&R and, Pay Now or Pay Later, KPIs, Committing to TCO. I mean, great stuff. I mean, the stuff that is absolutely as relevant today as when it was first published. And, I always think the funniest thing, it's not funny, it's a little bit sad, is that, we've had all this information at our fingertips, for 20 years or more. And in, far too many of our organizations, we've only enacted about, 20 or 30%. And, I look at myself and I say, how is that possible? Right? I mean, somebody's actually told you what you need to do. Here's the 20 things you need to do to have a, functioning and effective real property asset management program, and you don't do them. So, and then you're just wondering, why aren't we doing better? Why don't we have the, the writing couldn't be any clearer on the wall. So so that's something that we're kind of dealing with, saying, we're going back to the basics. We're going to go back to kind of really the foundational principles about how we provide stewardship, and it's exciting, right? And so fortunately we have ISO 55000, which now we've adopted as the framework. So, and we look at it as our 6 large cabinets, and we have 39 cubby holes within those cabinets. And it's not the only thing we do, but it gives us a framework, right? It takes my personality and else's personality out of it, saying, it's not telling you what to do, but it's saying these are all the things that you need to have in order to have a true program. And then from there, this is from private sector, DOD, university, state, and local governments, because we've learned so much over these decades, right? And there's absolutely no reason, to recreate wheels that have long been established and lessons learned that you can simply implement. So, obviously starting to develop KPIs and what we'll call developmental KPIs, right? Depends on the level of maturity of your organization. And so as we're kind of in that shallow end of the pool, if you will, those will be some of the basic things: availability of systems, planned versus unplanned. Some of the other things, just to kind of get going, get that feeling of we're starting to collect the data to see how we're doing, and eventually evolve as the organization matures. We're fortunate to have leadership buy-in. So we've been able to get that RPAM policy approved by our assistant secretary and undersecretary for management. So now, now we have this overriding umbrella, and there's nothing stopping us, right? And a lot of times there's just too much bureaucracy and we can't get it going. But, we're trying to kind of cut through the red tape on that and say, okay, no, we got it now, but now we got to go. And, how do we go? We have to, it's really nothing short than a culture change and a complete organizational transformation, because it's just not how we've been doing it, things in the past. And no one in particular is to blame. It's the way it is. And I think anyone would say there's no organization that does this perfectly, right? But we need to identify and break down each of those silos. We need to integrate. We need to communicate. We need to coordinate. And in doing so, we start to learn our blinders come off and we start to look at the big picture. So we have kind of 5 components that we're looking at, which is portfolio management, operations and maintenance delivery, project management, customer service, and RPAM project implementation itself. So, it starts with doing that gap analysis. You got to know where you are to baseline that. And so, as Bob knows, and has been incredibly helpful for us to start to get snapshots of our sites for which we have ownership or delegation, and taking initial shots, through data that we have and through parametrics to kind of give a picture of where we are and what are some of the risks that we face, so that we can kind of start to put good plans together. So we've got about 30 tasks that we're working on that we're trying to get done in this next 6-month period. COVID's made it interesting for us, so we do a lot through Teams and shared documents, going through that, and that was kind of a transition, right? I mean, I'm a in-person whiteboard person, and so kind of moving in this direction has been a challenge. But now everybody's getting pretty comfortable with it, and we can have a document where everybody's actually editing at the same time, and we seem to get a lot done. So I think the key is we want movement, right? So potential versus kinetic energy, hard to kind of get started, but once you get started, it's a lot easier to course correct. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. It may be 60 or 70% solutions, but they're enough to get going with. And as we go forward, we'll get those lessons learned, and we will make those corrections to get better and better at what we're doing. So it's kind of this, there should be a feeling of urgency, right? I mean, I feel it every day coming in. This is, if it's ever going to be done, it needs to be done now, right? And we're the people to do it, so let's get at it. But that being said, we don't work in a vacuum, right? I mean, from what Chris is doing, from what Peter's doing, what so much of us are doing across the industry, we've got to stay connected. We've got to share these experiences about what's working, what's not working. And so I really look forward to us, really becoming a part of that, become a much more vibrant part of the industry, and not an anomaly, right? That's not going to get us anywhere. So that's kind of the direction that we're moving. Standardized processes and templates for facility condition, inspections that will now become, a mandatory requirement, validating as Peter's saying, you got to have an inventory, right? I think Chris is saying the same thing. It all starts with a valid and accurate inventory, and also what the condition is, right? I mean, how do you plan if you don't know what you have, right? It doesn't even make any sense. So, defining nomenclature and establishing data management standards is absolutely important, right? We want to deal with things that are drop-down menus, that we actually speak the same language, and one term means the same to everyone, and it doesn't have 6 or 7 different uses. So part of our thing now is to actually speak the same language, which is something new for us as well. I think it's important as we look at our people at our locations that this concept of ownership, right? That if I'm in charge of a site in Charleston, or I'm in Colorado, wherever I may be, or I'm in Ouagadougou overseas, that as the facility manager, I take ownership of my site. I know everything. I'm passionate. My management of that facility is visceral, right? And it's that type of ownership that we really got to feel, because when we do so, we really take everything personally about what we do, and we make sure that we have the information we need to do our jobs, to protect our people, and to protect our physical assets. So the next thing we're doing is looking at a communications plan, right? We need to be able to communicate internally so people understand not just what we're doing, but more importantly, why we're doing it. Why is this going to be not just a benefit to the organization as a whole, but why is it going to benefit you individually, right? And if we do this right, everyone does benefit by virtue of moving in this direction. So we've done a lot of work in that, and doing initial placemats for our sites, and doing some parametrics. So it helps us kind of tell a good story. Like the other speakers, we use Maximo on that one. We had to kind of configure it in a certain way to do a certain thing. I think we realized that we want to move it in a little bit different direction. So we're starting a new pilot that really is kind of focused on customer service and stewardship of that facility, right? We, like probably many, we outsource a lot of our O&M. I've worked in both systems, from in-house staff to outsourced. Both approaches can work, but they require different things and different skill sets, right? So if you're outsourcing, then you have to have a very strong contract administration structure, and you need to have quality assurance and surveillance plans, and you really need to be on top of your metrics. So, in that case, we're working on it. We're looking at our portfolio across the board, and putting together that strategic capital plan, right? And kind of set criteria for why one group is here versus somewhere else, and what is it that needs to be in this headquarters building, for instance, as opposed to somewhere that's out 2 or 3 layers, past the beltway. So a lot of these things are going to be important, because we want to make sure that we still produce the value, and we get the right people in the right place, at the right cost, and in the right condition. So by virtue of our efforts, we've been fortunate to get approval through our through VP and OMB of 17 million. Hopefully that will come. We're on a CR right now, and we'll see what happens. But the idea that we would start to get an augmentation to our base for deferred maintenance and repairs, and that's kind of the first time that we've had that. We're incredibly appreciative of it. We want to make sure that we make the very best use of every cent of that, which means, again, having a proactive plan, being able to forecast forward to know exactly what we're going to do. There's any number of challenges, but I am actually optimistic about the future, right? And I'm optimistic because it's something that we're all working on, and if we work on it together, we're going to get farther faster. And so we can work and share base documents, and we can it's always easier to edit than draft from scratch. And as Bob knows, I say to all people all the time, if you're writing something from scratch, you're already wrong, right? You're wrong, right? There isn't anything that we are trying to do that hasn't been done already in one way, shape, or form. So let's work as a team across the industry, share things that we have, so that we can help each other go there. That's what I have to share today. I'm actually happy to answer questions. I do want to give a shout out to some of our team members, Lisa Kirienko and Deborah Snyder and Alex Rayleigh and Tara Lawson and a host of others. And of course, Bob, Eric, and Emily from the Wolper team, who are really helping us to stay on track with this. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here today.
Thanks, Keith. So let me jump in here real quick. We got a few questions, and I'm going to put it to all three of you, whoever wants to jump in first. One of them is kind of a two-part one, but let me back up this is actually a really good question. I wasn't aware, but there's a public law 115-435 called the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018 that requires that data be inventoried and collected in an orderly fashion, but also expects you to use that data to make fact-based decisions that influence future investments, programs, and policies. It sounds like somebody was listening when you guys were talking about the need to have better data and clean data and apparently put it into law. So how are these and standards you're working on and best practices aligned with other broader governance-based initiatives such as this public law? And I'll open it up to any of you guys.
I'll jump in.
If you guys have something, we are grappling with that, but go ahead.
You go ahead, Peter.
Okay, yeah. So the way that manifests, I don't review that public law. You know, the Corps of Engineers, we have stovepipes, so we have organizations that do that. But I'm aware of that impetus there, and our CIO is managing the implementation of that. They've got a pretty robust program to do some enterprise level data architecture work. So some of that effort that I was mentioning with the mission essential functions list, or the data that we use for mission essential functions projects, and even our operational condition assessment and our Maximo data sets, technically they fall under effort, but I'll be honest with you, I've asked the CIO to participate on our data architecture because they're good at it. They know how to do that sort of thing. They've mentioned a couple of times that they've got this initiative going, and my posture is you can take over as soon as you're ready. But in the meantime, I'm going to progress it. I think that public law just it's taking a little bit of in the IT community to really get moving, and I'm a little skeptical how quickly we're going to see results. So I'm kind of work as a way to prod. We would gladly cede this effort to them if they presented themselves and said, "Hey, we're going to sort out the data architecture." So it's out there. It's affecting us.
Okay.
Chris, you want to go? You want me to jump in?
Just quickly, I'm not intimately familiar with that law. That's great. I'm going to do some more research on it. That would definitely help our case. It's something we're really big on, is, like I mentioned before, just collecting good data and organizing that data so we can get value out of it. But thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to do some more research on it.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I kind of mentioned a little bit in my talk. I mean, I welcome this, right? I do not believe that left to our own devices, we're going to get there or not get there fast enough. So whether it's executive orders or public laws or OMB or GAO or OIG, welcome them all, because it really kind of helps drive the change that needs to happen. And, you know, one of the things that we really struggle with is how do we make operations and maintenance and stewardship sexy, right? You know, new stuff is sexy, and you know, everybody wants to go to the ribbon cuttings and stuff like that, but the majority of the cost and the majority of the time comes after you've cut that ribbon, and people just forget that, right? And that goes all the way up to, you know, to the highest reaches of our government. So, you know, when you enact things like this public law, it just forces that focus to be, you know, Bob knows the iceberg slide that I like so much, right? So, you know, what we normally see is you know, that acquisition, design, you know, construction is that part of the iceberg that's visible, right? But where's the majority of the mass of an iceberg is below the surface, right? And that's kind of where most of us dwell in this environment, and yet it doesn't get a lot of visibility. So I think it's great, and bring on more.
Real quick before we get to the next question, I want to acknowledge that it looks like we're going to go over time, and I just want to thank you all for having been here, and thank everyone who attended. I'm going to just show the slide because, you know, again, without these organizational members of the Asset Leadership Network, none of this would be possible. So really big thank you to these organizations and to you guys for being here today, Keith, Bob, Chris, Peter. And if you're willing, I'll just pass it right back and we can answer a few more questions and hopefully wrap up in 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think we just got a couple more.
Okay, awesome.
Actually, we have an easy one for you, Keith. If you can repeat the 5 areas that you're focused on there at Department of State.
Absolutely. So it's portfolio management, operations and maintenance delivery, project management, customer service, and the actual implementation of the real property asset management program itself.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
And this other question, I think I can turn it into a 2-part question because they're related. So, and this actually is for all 3 of you because I think you all have these aspects. So, how do you balance great asset management with the risk of cyber hacking and cybersecurity issues? Because it can lead to greater increased interactivity, of course. And then the second part of that is in relation to cybersecurity. Do you guys feel the organizations are more at risk when silos exist or less at risk regarding cybersecurity?
So I think on the silo question, definitely probably more at risk. And then through asset management, everybody plays a part in asset management across any given agency. So we have our IT and cybersecurity folks involved in any project we're undertaking.
Yeah,
Very
I'd
good.
say I think I agree with Chris that silos present more risk. I think in terms of cyber attacks and different things, we are very interested in trying to make sure that we have real-time monitoring of our critical systems, across the country and hopefully across the world. But always there's a potential for people to come in and gain control of that. So some of the advances that have been made in the cloud and in the tunnels have been, I think we're at a point that we can do it pretty securely. But that being said, the bad guys never stop working on things, so we need to continue to be vigilant about coming up with making sure that how we are capturing and transmitting data is done securely.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only thing that I'll add to it is that risk is real. There's no doubt about it. Not just from SCADA and monitoring data, but the condition data. And so I just keep connected to my cybersecurity guy. I mean, you have to, because it's just not what I do. And that area is so dynamic that to sort of do it as an avocation is foolish. So when we're dealing with data, we either bring our cybersecurity people onto the team, or we make them dial in from time to time and consult us, because it's just too complex for ordinary folks who deal with ordinary levels of paranoia. We're not equipped. We're not equipped for what we really ought to be worried about.
Well, to me, this is an interesting question. I think I'm going to push on it a little harder because all 3 of your agencies have security concerns, and rightfully so. But you've all mentioned too the importance of consistent data and visibility, which, as you provide that sort of visibility across an agency, it can increase the opportunity for penetration. If somebody has a SCADA system in one site and another SCADA system at the another site, and they never talk, then you can't get to the second site from the first one if the first one happens to get breached. So in that sense, it could increase the risks. And so is it harder, do you guys think, to manage those cybersecurity risks now that you're developing basically enterprise visibility?
Well, Bob, it will. I think the reality is it will interfere. It does. It does interfere with the sharing of the data. Some data, not all. That's just the way it is. The risks are pretty significant for certain types of instruments. So it just does. But for most of the data, and you want to make it available, for the most part, you can do it, but I would do it wrong. I wouldn't take the precautions, right? I don't even know how to. But our cybersecurity people know. They know, hey, put it in this environment and have people access it there. And not everybody accesses it there, only, you know, these people. And it'll generally work out. I'm concerned. I'm not so concerned about the way it is now. I'm a little concerned about the future because there's going to be screw ups. There's going to be mistakes. And so even though I maybe I keep the data in a secure repository and I limit access, draconian about it, and we'll start going backwards. That I'm a little concerned about that. But today it's manageable.
Okay. Does anybody want to add to that? Chris or Keith?
So I think it's helped. You know, part of our inventory effort was to collect all of our inventory on SCADA. And that we found SCADA systems we had no idea were out there operating, and they weren't properly protected. I think we plugged that hole now. That risk is much less than it used to be for us. But I think just asset management in general has helped us with those cybersecurity issues.
Yeah, I think for us in the State Department, obviously, we're absolutely concerned about security, right? And working with our diplomatic security partners, with our IT professionals, and even a number of bureaus that are dedicated to this exact topic. So it's something that we are cognizant of and you know, kind of consistently train on that. And quite frankly, it's taken us a long time to even do any type of real-time monitoring or same systems for these exact reasons. So it's something that you know, for us requires an incredible number of reviews and permissions to do just about anything. So,
you know, it seems to me in hearing the answers that that the practice of asset management is actually something that might help with that, because, you know, that in general, asset management is about optimizing things, limited resources against great needs. And so balancing the security needs against the need for access is something where the practice of asset management may actually get put into place for that one particular problem.
yeah. So, Bob, I think one thing we did is we worked with our diplomatic security people, and of course they have a lot of physical security equipment as well. So whether it's Delta barriers or gates or different things like that, if you know, all that equipment also is on life cycle. So you know, if you kind of bring them into the asset management world and show them that they can personally benefit by doing this, then it opens a few other doors to you know, allow them to get their data as well as the data that we want as well. So I think on everything it's partnership, but really just understanding what the risks are. That's
great. I appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you guys, all three of you. This has been a really great session. And my big takeaway was it's going to be a quote from Peter about the tyranny of small decisions, which I think is priceless. That's so true. And we let it happen. You know, it kind of happens, and then you look back and go, how did I get here? So I'm going to remember that one. Thanks again. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn this over to Jim Dieter.
Yeah, hi. That was just amazing. Before these guys went on, I said, well, this is always the superstar session. And they went, oh, I don't know. That was a superstar session. Well, first, thank you all very much for being here and for obviously, you know, carrying the idea of asset management, ISO 55000, forward in the US. You truly are setting a model for what others can do. The scale of the assets you're dealing with is mind-numbing for me. And I'm really struck by the ease with which you all addressed how asset management, even though you're, I guess maybe you would say you're all, you know, on the path, but not anywhere near to where you want to go, still making plans. Yet how it helps with cybersecurity, helped the story about the COVID response was stunning. You just don't think about the way that this can play out. So from an ALN perspective, you know, we're just looking for ways to get this out there and to share it with more people. I'd like to follow up with you all on what we can do. We need this information and this video from this it needs to be broadly seen so people can understand what's happening. On a micro level, I would say, for example, and it's an ALN example too, for Keith, 2 weeks ago, I got an email from the personal property people at the Department of State. And I, grew up in personal property management before I broadened my horizons a bit. And they're just really starting a process, trying to staff up and figure out what to do. And I'm going to assume you aren't connected with those folks, but it turns out a lot of their stuff is in your
a
building.
sister group.
Yeah.
They are a sister group, sister office to us. Yes.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, so I was going to offer to introduce you if you hadn't, as a consultant in this field. Often we work with companies and organizations, and we find out when they get all the appropriate people in the room that everybody's doing introductions because they never met each other before. But more of those silos. I do have a thought in an earlier session today that if we think about silos as intersections, maybe it makes them easier to traverse and to understand how they can work together. But just again, thank you all, and thanks, Bob, for bringing this forward. I'd love to have about an hour just to Bob talking about this sometime too. We'll have to. I think part of our ALN mission for the coming years is find. We're just really latched on to this idea of video and not having to be all in the same place as a good mechanism. So we will do our best to create opportunities for you all to share this information. And we have other initiatives we're working on. We have the idea of having a strategic asset management plan for various sectors to kind of bring interest like around water. I mean, we have the hubris to think we can think of something at that high of a level. But, boy, there's a lot of that represented on this call today. And, we're having a session in 2 weeks just on water. And that's like different than this. It's like, wow, remarkable. So again, thank you all. And thanks, Bob. And I'll turn it over to Nick, and he can have us move on.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, just echoing the thank yous. Great session. Glad we could all be here, and so glad you guys could stick around for a little after hours. And I don't want to ask any more of your time. And so maybe we should call it here.
Sounds good. Good.
Take care, guys.
Have a good evening.
Thank you all.